of WDC. And tonight our program is about the Maryland Ballot Question 1, Impact on Reproductive Rights, and our future with our guest speaker, Wendy Frosch. Participants will be muted during the program, but for best viewing, use the speaker view instead of gallery view. And the event will be recorded and will be published on the WDC website and YouTube channel. Submit any questions via the chat window and Q&A, and we have another slide. When we get to that, we'll show you what it looks like. Next. Well, we'd like to extend an invitation for those who aren't members on the call to join WDC. For over 60 years as a large politically engaged club of members and activists. We have speaker series, community education panels, candidate forums, state and county advocacy, get out the vote programs, happy hours with a purpose. And we've been very, very active, if you haven't noticed, during this election season. So feel free to reach out to one of us or go on our website and sign up for one of our committees, and also to amplify your voice in Annapolis and in the county. I'd like to introduce the WDC Executive Committee. At this time, it's President Tazeen Ahmad. First Vice President is Cynthia Rubenstein. Second Vice President, Lisa Fuller. Secretary is myself, Joanne Corvus. Treasurer is Mary Lou Fox, and immediate past president is Diana Conway. We have several fairly active committees in the club. Our advocacy committee is the largest and the most active. We do a lot of legislative advocacy, and we have multiple committees under the advocacy committee. We have our communications committee run by Lisa Fuller, and they do a lot of the social media and website activity. So newsletters are very popular. We have a community education committee, which is Margaret Berry and Laura Stewart, and it's Margaret Berry and the community education committee that's sponsoring and planned this event tonight. Our events committee is Levante Chapman and Nicole, well, Tiedi. I never get her name right. I'm sorry, Nicole. And the finance committee is, of course, Mary Lou Fox. We have membership and outreach with the famous Enid Light. And we have programs, and we'll show you a list of speakers that we've had in our program series. It's very impressive. Is Barbara Zelenko and Stephanie Cardot. And partnership and outreach is Fatmata Berry and Tazeen Ahmad. Next. Here's an example of some of the speakers we've had in the past. I mean, I'm sure that this is just a small list, but we've had Jamie Raskin several times, Sarah Raskin, Barb McQuaid from Sisters-in-Law, Brooke Learman, several of the elected officials, of course, in Maryland and the state of Maryland and in Montgomery County. The legal analyst, Chuck Rosenberg, John Sarbanes. I mean, the list just goes on, and I really think you should go to the website on a regular basis and look at your newsletters if you're a member to find out who's coming up in the future. And just save the date. This is our annual members-only holiday party. We're going to have several good speakers, food, a social hour from 4 to 6 on December 15th. Well, the venue is TBD, but please put it on your calendars. And you do have to be a member. So this is a members only event. It's one of the perks for being a member of WDC. So between now and December 15th, if you're not a member, sign up, please. It's $35. Next. So we have a presentation, but there will be an opportunity to submit Q&A. And in this platform, what we do is you go into the participants list and you look for the participant in the chat called Q&A and write your questions in there, and then those will get to our moderator. I'd like to introduce our speakers for tonight. Wendy Frosch, of course, I think everyone has heard of her. She's the founder of Healthcare Management Strategies. She has expertise in the facilitation and development of regional and statewide initiatives for improving access to healthcare, strategic planning, managed care development, and the design and implementation of integrated delivery systems. She's currently on the board of directors of Planned Parenthood Maryland, Planned Parenthood Advocates of Washington, Maryland, and Virginia, and MobileMed. She has a master's degree from Harvard University and a bachelor's degree from Wesleyan University. Welcome, Wendy. Our next speaker would be Fatmata Berry. She's a member of the WDC Board of Directors. She's owner of the Berry Law Center, practicing immigration and special education law, something very important nowadays. Former education director of the Montgomery County Police Accountability Board and the Administrative Charging Committee. And next is Margaret Martin Berry, who is also going to moderate this program. She's a co-chair of WDC's Community Education Committee, a member of the Board of Directors. She's Emeritus Professor of Law, Vermont Law School, former director of the Reentry Clinic at American University's Washington College of Law, and former professor at Columbus School of Law, the Catholic University of America. And Margaret has done advocacy in the criminal justice reform area for WDC for several years, and she really is a wonderful addition to the club. And now I'm going to pass it over to Margaret, who will continue with the program.
Margaret, please unmute yourself.
I got my picture on. Hello, everyone. Good evening. And thank you, Joanne, for that introduction of the speakers tonight and bringing everyone up to date. And I also want to just pause for a second and thank both Lisa Fuller and Holly Sirakis for their work in getting the word out on this, as well as other members of WDC board, because there's been a lot of work that went into getting the word out. And hopefully this information will be very helpful to those of you who are here tonight and others as we post this on YouTube. I also want to thank Levante Chapman, who is WDC's events chair, as you heard. And Levante will be handling the questions that come in on the Q&A and getting them to me. So thank you, Levante, for that. But I'm particularly excited about our speaker tonight. Wendy Frosch will be talking with us about the why and the what of question one. And I'll be asking her questions to kind of bring that out, but she has such a rich background that I know it'll be very informative for you. Fatmata Berry will come at the end of our program and tell us, what should we be doing? We have this information about question one. What should we as Marylanders be doing who care about this issue? So I look forward to tonight's discussion. And I'm going to ask you to put on your speaker view, because we're going to have a PowerPoint that comes up as part of what we're doing. And it'll be helpful, I think, if you have the speaker view so you can see better what's going on. So I want to start then, Wendy, with a question. But let me just kind of bring us to where we are. In the wake of the Supreme Court's ruling in 2022 in Dobbs v. Jackson, 50 years of reproductive rights that people had come to rely on as protected under the US Constitution was basically kicked out as not protected by that Constitution. And the states became the battleground for reproductive rights. Now, Maryland took a number of steps to establish reproductive rights in the state legislatively in the wake of Dobbs. But we have this constitutional amendment that's following that. And I'd like to start, Wendy, if we could, with just talking a little bit about what the legislative steps were that Maryland took. And I'm going to ask Levante if you would just put up the first slide, which talks about what was done in 2022 to help kind of walk us through this. So Wendy?
Sure. Thank you very much, Margaret, and good evening, WDC. I think the Women's Democratic Club was the first organization that I joined when I moved back to Maryland 13 years ago, and I continue to be overwhelmingly impressed with the work that gets done in this organization. And I'm very proud to be a member and very proud as a member of the board of directors of Freedom in Reproduction Maryland firm to have WDC as a partner in our activities. And so, as Margaret noted, Maryland has been very proactive with regard to protecting reproductive rights. I mean, back in the 90s, Roe was codified in statute in Maryland. And over the years, we've seen a lot of building upon the foundation that was set back in the 90s. And as we watched the restrictions on abortion come into play around the country, we saw folks narrowing the window of time in which abortion could be accessed, lots of barriers that went up in terms of diagnostic requirements or professional affiliations, et cetera, et cetera. And what Maryland did in contrast back in 2022 was to pass the Abortion Care Access Act. And that consisted of three major components that really we felt would protect not only access to abortion, but also make sure that there was a strong protection for those who were providing abortion. And so that first piece of legislation in 2022 expanded the scope of who could perform procedural abortion. We have historically allowed nurse practitioners and nurse midwives and physician assistants to do medication abortion, but the procedural abortion was only allowed to be done by physicians. And so in 2022, that was expanded to certified nurse practitioners, certified nurse midwives, physicians assistants who had undergone specific training to be able to practice abortion procedures. Additionally, there was money set aside in the state budget annually to train abortion care providers and their clinical care teams. And this was intended to expand the pool of providers, because a lot of folks, while they were certified nurse midwives or certified nurse practitioners, advanced practice nurse practitioners, they may have never learned to do procedural abortions. And so we determined that with everything that was going on around the state, and when I say we, there was the Maryland coalition of it's the Reproductive Rights Coalition, which had put forward this package of legislative proposals. There was a really strong sense that we needed to expand the pool so that we could create access should we see an influx of folks from around the country. And then the other thing that that particular package of legislation did was to create insurance coverage equity so that insurance plans would cover abortion at no additional cost to the individual. Next slide. So the next piece came in 2023. Again, watching things narrowed down. And you will remember that the Dobbs decision came down at the end of 2022. And so the legislative session in 2023 was absolutely in response to what we saw coming relative to abortion access across the country. And when you think about a state like Texas, where there is basically a total ban and there is a bounty for folks who decide they want to monitor their friends and neighbors' access to care, there was a sense that we in Maryland, number one, needed to protect our providers. And so a shielding bill was put in place that would protect both providers and patients who received legal reproductive health care, including abortion, from attacks, from subpoenas, from folks in other states. And in order to make sure that we were able to protect providers and patients, we asked the legislature to enact, and they enacted a privacy bill, a data privacy bill that protected electronic records from being accessed and subpoenaed in other states. We also wanted to see that universities and colleges around the state were planning for and creating access for students to get comprehensive sexual and reproductive health care. And that included not only abortion, but STI testing and treatment, contraceptives, and emergency contraceptives. And then lastly, even though reproductive rights had been enshrined in statute in Maryland, what we recognized was that literally an anti-choice legislature here, an anti-choice governor there, or an anti-choice judge anywhere could radically alter the landscape for access to abortion around the country. And we felt that number one, we wanted to put the strongest protections in place, knowing that while the climate in Maryland is very positive today, things can change, things have changed. We had, prior to the current administration, an anti-choice governor in Annapolis, and many, I think actually all of the bills that came up under that administration were vetoed, and fortunately the legislature was able to override those vetoes. So we felt that while I wouldn't say that it is easy to pass a law, it's certainly easier to pass a law than to amend the Maryland Constitution. And so while we had a willing, if not really excited legislature that wanted to see a constitutional amendment on the ballot, we felt that this was an opportunity to really move things forward and enshrine reproductive rights in the Maryland Constitution. And while there's a lot of discussion about whether this is a guarantee of reproductive rights forever, whether this will ensure our rights, our children's rights, our families' rights forever and ever. I mean, the reality is, if there is ever a national abortion ban placed in effect, that will, in fact, override whatever we have in the Maryland Constitution. So while this isn't a permanent fix, this is as close as we can get given the current environment. Next slide, please. So the amendment itself is basically that everyone, it speaks to the individual's right to liberty and equality, has the fundamental right to reproductive freedom, and it's including but not limited to. So I think that's an important clause. The ability to make and effectuate decisions to prevent, continue, or end one's own pregnancy. And that the state may not directly or indirectly deny, burden, or abridge that right unless justified by a compelling state interest and achieved by the least restrictive means.
So I want to just pause there, Wendy.
Sure.
What is this compelling state interest, and how would that limit the right that's embodied in this amendment?
Okay, that is a terrific question, and one that I did a lot of research on, because when I first read it, I found that particular piece of the amendment a little bit frightening. So one of the major functions of our Constitution is to protect people's freedoms by setting limits on the power of the government. So when a law is passed, it can be challenged in court to see if the law exceeds the government's power as outlined in the state's constitution, and to decide if that statute is in line with the Constitution. The court applies different levels of scrutiny based on the language of the law and its impact on our rights. And while I like to joke, while I'm not a lawyer, I've only played one on Zoom. There are 3 possible levels of scrutiny that the court can apply. And the lowest is the rational basis, which only requires that a law has any conceivable relationship to a legitimate government interest, and it's applied when fundamental rights are not at play. And then the highest bar is strict scrutiny, which applies when the government is attempting to restrict a fundamental right. So under strict scrutiny, the government has to show that the interest served by the particular law is compelling or important enough that it justifies infringing on a fundamental right, and that any infringement on that right is done with the least restrictive or in the most careful way possible. And this is the standard that is applied to the most serious cases where the government infringes on our core liberties. And it is an extremely difficult bar for a law to overcome this standard, which means that protecting the right by requiring any law that restricts it to pass the strict scrutiny test. And this is really the best way to limit the government's ability to infringe on that right. So the language of the amendment literally sets out the bar that a court case would have to meet in order for the government to intervene and curtail those fundamental rights. And so it is absolutely the strongest protection that can be created. And as much as it sort of, it's got a, ooh, what is this? The state may abridge the right. What it does is really set the bar to limit how that can be abridged, if that answers the question.
It does. And I think it's an important point because as you look at it, you think, oh my goodness, this is inherent in the language as a limitation, when in fact it's trying to set that bar as high as it can, or
Exactly.
is in fact setting it as high as it can.
Exactly. Thank you. Next slide, please. So again, the constitutional amendment confirms an individual's right to reproductive liberty. And so voting for the constitutional amendment would enable us to add that amendment to the state's Bill of Rights. And obviously voting against it would keep it from becoming part of our Constitution. Next slide, please.
Well, I think that's really it on your part of the slides, Wendy. This one I'm going to pose for Fatmata as we get towards the end, but I want to go to some of the questions people might have. But before we go to that, just, has there been opposition to this proposal, this constitutional amendment? And if so, what does that opposition look like?
Sure, there absolutely has been. There are a couple of grassroots groups that were formed to fight the amendment. Many of you may have seen, if you were working at the polls during the primary, there was a particular palm card that was being handed out. And the focus, and it's very interesting because it's pretty much the same strategy that has been used where abortion has been on the ballot around the country. And what it focuses on is transitional care for minors. And the card says that this amendment will take the minors out of the parental consent, parental control when it comes to transitional care. And you saw the language. It says nothing whatsoever about transitional care or parental consent. And Maryland currently has requirements for parental consent, both for abortion care and for transitional care. So minors in Maryland, unless there is a compelling need and it's been brought through the legal system appropriately, cannot receive this type of care without parental consent. The other piece, there is also in the amendment a clause that says the state cannot deny or burden an individual. And I saw a full page ad in a local publication in Frederick County that basically that underscored the word burden and said, this means that Maryland taxpayers will be funding abortion going forward. because burden is financial burden and you're going to pay for it. And, in all honesty, when medical care is paid for by Medicaid or other state, programs, certainly there is tax money involved in that. But this does not single out abortion. It does not require that we, the taxpayers, are going to be paying for all abortions. So those have been the two principal pieces that have been thrown up against the ballot initiative. People saying it just goes way too far. And in fact, it really, other than making it part of our Constitution, doesn't really change the landscape. So
So
I think
I just wanted to kind of flesh out a little bit. There was the viability test. Where does that sit with this constitutional amendment? Are we still looking at viability as framed in Roe, or is this broader, if you will?
so. Maryland does not have a limit on when an abortion can be performed. And so, this doesn't change that. It doesn't open it up farther. And it really does have as there was a particular abortion procedure called a D&E, a dilation and evacuation, that was banned when the Supreme Court looked at what was affectionately called a partial birth abortion. And so that procedure was banned. And that is a procedure that was used in late-term abortions. So it doesn't really change the status in that regard. And late-term abortions are, and I don't have the statistics at my fingertips, but they're very rarely performed. And, obviously I can't say that they are never performed, other than to save the life or the health of the woman, or because there is a severe fetal anomaly. But 96, 98% of abortions that are done in the third trimester are really done for very dire medical complications.
Okay, I'm looking here. Someone just nope, I don't have a question from the audience, and I want to see if there are any. Maybe we can go to the screen, the view all, and see if anyone wants to the gallery, and see if anyone wants to raise their hand and ask a question. If there are any, or has Wendy done such a fabulous job of explaining it that no one has a question to ask? Diana,
Hi.
yes.
Hi, Wendy, and thank you for coming on to talk about this. It's very helpful. Can you address a little bit of the political landscape? I know you talked about opposition, but in terms of the political landscape that we're coming up for this election. Thanks.
So I have to say that FIRM is nonpartisan. So I can't really talk about the election in terms of Democratic or Republican candidates. But I can say that when we did our polling back in March, what we saw, and it was before the primary, so there was not a Democratic candidate at that point who'd been nominated. What our polling showed was that people were invigorated by this issue being on the ballot, that folks who were lower turnout voters were motivated by the amendment being on the ballot and said that this would likely get them to the polls. And so I think you can make assumptions about what that means for the political landscape. And I was thrilled this morning. I assume everybody gets Maryland Matters and saw the most recent poll that says at this point in time, the 69% of Marylanders support the ballot initiative. And I think that's really telling, because while I cannot suggest that anyone vote for a Republican or a Democrat, what I will suggest is that when you're voting, if you support reproductive rights, it's very important that you make your decision from the top of the ballot to the bottom of the ballot, because as I said, there are judges around the country who've been appointed who are strongly anti-reproductive rights. It's really important that we support reproductive rights from the top of the ballot to the bottom of the ballot. So that's my nonpartisan answer to your question. And I know Fatmata has some things she wants to share about it.
Margaret?
I had myself muted for a minute. But I do want to get to Fatmata, but I want to see if we have any questions on the substance that Wendy covered before we move.
I do, Margaret.
Oh, okay, Joanne, sorry.
Sort of a devil's advocate question. Margaret said that Maryland does not have a restriction on when you can get an abortion, yet Roe versus Wade does, right? Don't they have a
Ability.
say again?
Viability, yeah.
Yeah. So if a state codifies Roe versus Wade, do they have to have that same viability rule?
It was, so Roe versus Wade, it does say that abortion is legal up to the point of viability. And then there are exceptions in there. So it's the exceptions that are what would govern the access to abortion. And I want to be I want to just double check my numbers and make sure. I mean, it basically says abortion in Maryland is legal at all stages of pregnancy. And that, so that, yes, it is up to viability. And I don't, I can honestly say that I don't know legally how that sort of non-alignment, that Maryland has no limits, but nationally it's legal up to viability. So that would be the ruling limit, that a federal law supersedes a state law. So if that were to ever be lifted, Maryland, would have full access.
So they would supersede it.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. I just want to also point out that in the chat, someone asked where they can get the yard signs that say vote yes, because they said some of their friends didn't even know about the ballot question.
Yeah, and I know that Fatmata is going to talk a little bit more about that. So
Okay,
But yeah, definitely
great.
can talk a bit. But I just wanted to pick up for a minute on this idea of how wide open it is in Maryland, because it seems to me that on the other side, that's where the compelling state interest might enter as well, as a state interest in going beyond viability, if you will. Is that something that you've heard in the conversations, Wendy, about how this might play out, this constitutional amendment?
Actually, that really hasn't been the focus.
Okay.
Again, because when you talk to physicians, there are very few who do late-term abortion. It is, the medical practice, really, I mean, it's a medical decision as to whether someone needs an abortion in the third trimester. And it is not done unless there are critical reasons, either to protect the health and life of the mother or because someone is carrying a non-viable fetus. And so, the language that's been tossed around during the presidential campaign about babies being aborted after birth. I mean, I don't know.
Seems like a contradiction in terms of aborted after birth.
Right, or murdered after birth. I mean, that is not abortion. And abortion is a medical procedure. It's done for therapeutic reasons. I mean, one of the things that I've learned over the last several years is what happens to women who've sought an abortion and been turned away, either because of bans or restrictions in their state. And just in general, outcomes for these individuals and their families are really severely impacted. Women have a harder time economically, achieving their educational goals, maintaining housing. Their health is impacted. There have been longitudinal studies of women who've been turned away from an abortion compared to those who've received a wanted abortion. And the statistics show that there are severe consequences when women are denied this particular medical service. And so it isn't a matter of choice. And I think we've really tried to sanitize the language in response to what the anti-people say. But we are talking about a medical service that is really part and parcel of essential care for folks who can and do get pregnant. And I know, Fatmata, you have stuff to say, so I don't want to cut into your time any more than I have.
No, but thank you. And I think, we can go back and forth a bit, but I do want to ask you, Fatmata, what have you been seeing out there in the state in terms of people's awareness and interest in this issue?
Well, basically, people are not aware. That's the unfortunate part. There are many people who don't understand what question 1 is. They don't know what it's about. So even when you start to explain it, they don't quite get it. There are questions like, well, if it's already passed, why are they trying to put it in the, why are they trying to have it in the Constitution? Why are we going through all this if it's already passed in legislation? So those kind of things are things that I'm seeing and hearing. And the need for maybe having small house parties to discuss this issue with different people, having more events.
Getting some posters out on your lawns.
On your lawns.
Have you seen any of those posters, the question 1 posters to put out there? Has there been anti-question 1?
Not around my community, but then again,
yeah.
We got a new shipment of signs in last Friday, and I was part of a team that assembled 2,500 signs on Friday. We have been asked by the state Democratic Party for, I think it's 5,000 signs that they are going to keep in their district offices. They have said they want them to put at poll sites for early voting and on election day. We have made arrangements with some, and because we're nonpartisan, we cannot post the party's sites on our website, but we've made arrangements with various hubs in Montgomery and Prince George's and Frederick and Anne Arundel, et cetera, to host our signs. They will, in addition to being at the, I believe it's the Silver Spring party office, they will be in Rockville at the League of Women Voters. They are not there yet. And so you won't see it on our website until we've actually been able to get them delivered there. But I'm hoping by the end of this week that there will be signs available. Many of you know Carol Brand. I gave her, 25 signs yesterday. And so you can check with her and pick some up from her if she still has them out on her side porch for distribution.
So, Fatma, I'm going to get back to you with the question of, okay, information parties, if you will, to discuss the issue. What other things should people be thinking of? We're
People
getting
should-
really close to the election now, and what should
Yes.
be happening?
Yes, so as you are looking, Wendy kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, as you're looking at question 1 and you're looking at your ballot and you're trying to figure out how to ensure that question 1 passes. It's not just the passage of question 1, but it's ensuring that the people you put in there will maintain and keep it going. So just as a little background, this legislation, when it was passed in 2022, the current governor, the governor at the time was Hogan, and he vetoed that bill. But if it wasn't for the supermajority within the General Assembly, the Democratic supermajority, it would not have passed, but it overrode his veto. And now we have this, right? So consider the fact that during the Senate race, you have 2 people, one who's very much against the expansion and abortion, period. And you have Angela Alsobrooks, who is not and is in support. In D6, you have the same issue. You have Neil Parrott, who very much has said he is totally against abortion. He gets 100% rating by Maryland Right of Life group. So if you know anything about them, you know that they definitely are not for women's rights to have control of their body. And then you have April Delaney, who is the opposite of that. So when we talk about these things and we are discussing codifying issues like these and making sure that they stay, because that's really the reason why, right? People say, well, why do this? Because as Wendy said at the beginning, it could disappear. We saw what happened with Roe. It was a law. I mean, it was a decision that was made by the court, and they decided they're going to overturn their own decision. And it could happen here, right? If anything happens to the General Assembly and something switches, or we get a governor who is really bullish on these things, we may lose this right. So for everyone who is here, I would suggest that you talk to 10 people and ask them to talk to 10 people and ask them to talk to 10 people. And when they go to the ballot box, to make sure that they vote for this amendment to our Maryland Constitution, and educate other people. And if you're willing to have somebody come talk to a group of your friends, 10 people, let us know.
So I think that's a good point on which to end unless anyone has another question. So hopefully people feel informed. If you want to inform friends and have an easy way to do it, the video of tonight's session will be posted on the WDC Facebook page and on YouTube. So you can get the word out and point them to a discussion to hopefully help illuminate this issue. And I want to thank Wendy for explaining this so well to us tonight, and to Fatmata for kind of giving us the push to get out there and get going. So on that note, I'm going to turn it back over to Joanne, and thank you all for being here tonight. Oh, Wendy, you had your hand up?
I did. I put the link to the firm website in the chat, mdreprofreedom.com. There's a toolkit in there with sample letters to the editor, emails that you can send to your friends if you want to do a text bank, the text for texting. So please feel free to go there and use whatever is helpful. Sorry.
And maybe we can add that to our Facebook page as well. Great, thank you, Wendy. Joanne. You're silent. You're muted.
Again, thank you all for coming. This is a very, very important and timely subject. One of the reasons why we do these programs aren't only for the participants tonight, but to have a video that we can share on various platforms. And that's like Margaret said, if you have friends that want to know more about this, feel free to send them the video, and they can welcome to reach out to any of us with questions. I might, I'll have to talk to our comms team, but I think after this program, we'll probably send out an email to the participants tonight with all the links to the YouTube video and to Wendy's link for Repro Freedom. And so you'll have all that at your fingertips and you don't have to go looking for it. But right now, I'd like to, again, reach out to the people on this call who aren't members to join WDC, to build the blue wave. You can join, renew, donate, volunteer. And don't forget that in order to go to the holiday party, you have to be a member. And thank you again for joining us, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you.